Good morning, everyone. I welcome all of you to this important event at ECES today. It's the third dissemination of T20 results taking place in Cairo, and that's lovely because that's the first. The previous two took place in Dubai and South Africa, all following very successful event in India for T20 and G20, of course. The topics addressed covered the slogan very much. I don't know if you noticed the slogan on the agenda: One Earth, One Family, One Future. The talks in T20 covered all that very eloquently, sending very strong messages to G20 and putting the Global South on the map in ink for a change, because it has always been there in pencil. Suddenly it's in ink, and it's thanks to India. We have really to thank them for that. The leadership of India was really remarkable in G20 and T20, of course. And some of the topics that were addressed are going to be addressed in our sessions here. Bringing the event to Egypt is a first. It never happened before. And of course, it had to be us. It has to be coming to ECES. It cannot go anywhere else because we are the top think tank in Egypt. It's very simple, very straightforward. Modesty is my 22nd virtue, you know. Okay, and it's happening also on our 30th anniversary, so it's a happy moment for us, and it's the beginning of very serious collaboration of research between ECES and F in India with Dr. Samir. Can you hear me, Samir? Yes. Can you hear now?
Yes, I can hear you.
Very good. Okay, all right. This is the third dissemination of T20 results. The first time was in Dubai, then South Africa, and now Cairo, Egypt, for the first time. And it had to be ECES because we are the best. ORF is the best in India. We are the best in Egypt, okay? And this is the beginning of a lot of work between us. And I was commenting on your name, that your name is incredibly Egyptian. I've been wanting to tell you this for years. If you add an H to your last name, you become completely Egyptian. So you have to dig in your past and see where this is coming from. Okay? And it's a pleasure to have you. So without any delay, let me introduce the speakers in the opening session in the order of speaking. First, our chairman, and then our keynote speaker. Our chairman, who loves me very much, as you can see, Mr. Omar Mohanna, chairman of the Egyptian Center for Economic Studies. He is chairman of Promontory Type Egypt, which is affiliated with Pirelli. He's the chairman of Chubb Insurance Egypt. He's a member of the board of directors of a bunch of institutions. He is the former chairman of the Suez Cement group of companies. He has over 25 years of commercial and investment banking experience with Egyptian and international financial institutions. He's active in a number of organizations. He's a member in all the business organizations involving Egypt for all countries, the entire world, as a matter of fact. And he's a member of the board of Federation of the Egyptian Industries. And it's always a pleasure. It's a very long bio, Omar Bek, so it's always a pleasure, and it's in the file. The keynote speakers, we have His Excellency Ambassador Ragui ElEtreby. He's the Assistant Foreign Minister for Multilateral, International and Regional Economic Affairs and the personal representative of the President of the country to the G20. He has held several senior positions in the Egyptian Foreign Ministry, including being the Deputy Head of Mission in Tokyo and advisor to the Foreign Minister. He was elected as the Chairman of the Committee on Trade in Financial Services of the World Trade Organization 2007, holds a master's degree in international political economy and a BA in economics. So he's an economist. We welcome economists very much. Dr. Samir Saran, he's currently the president of the Observer Research Foundation, ORF, India's premier think tank. See, also modesty is his 22nd virtue as well, just like me. Okay, headquartered in New Delhi. His research focuses on issues of global governance, climate change, and energy policy, technology, and media, and India's foreign policy. He holds PhD from the Global Sustainability Institute in the UK. It's really a pleasure. We wanted to have you physically, and you promised that we are going to have this visit next year as outcome of our work that we're going to do through the year. without any delay, please, Omar Bik.
Thank you, Abla. I think Mr. Saran is not hearing you. He's pretending that he's hearing you to make you feel comfortable. No, it's really a pleasure to welcome you all to this very important event at ECS. And I would like really to especially welcome our guest speakers. I mean, great names who are honoring us with their presence, physical presence, as well as those who are joining us virtually. Special congratulations to India for successfully hosting the G20 and a job very well done in T20. Taken together, they have played a prominent role in putting the Global South on the world agenda, including adding the African Union as a member of G20, effectively rendering it G21 now. And it's an achievement that deserves to be really applauded. Today we have also the very special occasion, and that's the 30th anniversary of ECS. Time flies, and I'm proud to say that ECS has positively developed over the last 30 years with dynamism that allowed the institution not only to keep up with the huge changes of the Egyptian economy, but also to contribute to the making of some of the major positive changes. On that occasion, I'd really like to pay tribute to my colleagues who started ECS journey 30 years ago, and to commend them on their vision, dedication, and commitment. I'd like to really extend a very special welcome to Dr. Ahmed Galal, ECS's former director and head of research for 8 years. He's with us today. He's honoring us with his presence. And in fact, Ahmed is a man who ECS owes a lot. A lot of its success goes back to him. And he became later on Minister of Finance. And I think that not only ECS owes Ahmed, but Ahmed made a difference for ECS and for Egypt. Thank you for being here, Ahmed. In fact, we are all very proud of ECS. And for me personally, ECS is a landmark in my career. So I look forward to an excellent meeting today and great discussions during the different sessions. Thank you.
Your Excellency Ragui. Ambassador Ragui, please.
Thank you very much, and good morning to all of you. I'm really happy to be taking part of and being a keynote speaker in such an important and timely event with such distinguished participants and attendees and ministers and members of parliament and very good friends, and also to be taking part of celebrating 30th anniversary of ECES. It has been an incredible journey, I have to say, and you have been a voice of wisdom, value, and knowledge to many segments in our society and much beyond our borders. I am a first-hand beneficiary of the great work and products of ECES, particularly in my previous life when I spent 6 years in Washington sitting on the board of the World Bank Group. And I can imagine that, and you can imagine, especially Dr. Ziad Bahaddin, who was the governor of Egypt to the World Bank, that is not always the comfort zone of a career diplomat like myself, to be sitting on a board that is where most of the members are from the ministries of finance and central banks. So to a great extent, I owe it to the deep conversations that I had with Omar, with Abla, with Tariq, with Sharif, and many others that enabled me to better understand how to reach my objectives during my tenure, and also to help steer the discussions at the board in the direction that would serve best the interests of my countries and the countries that I was representing. Now getting back to the G20, and we're talking about here India's presidency, and actually we're happy that this event is coming at a time where we are really celebrating the achievements and accomplishments of India during its presidency of the G20, which will come to an end, I would imagine, tomorrow. And starting the 1st of December, Brazil will take on the chairmanship of the group. And we were invited maybe just a month after I assumed my position as the Assistant Foreign Minister to participate at the G20 during the presidency of India. And the first thing that came to our mind, as this was the third participation. We were invited before during the Chinese presidency, 2016, and during the Japanese presidency in 2019. It seems that we're always lucky when the presidencies are in the Asian continent. And we had to, I understand from Abla that my role is to provide the global context of the G20 and as well a focus on Egypt's participation. And I want to say that the first thing that we had to provide to our president is what would be our recommendations in terms of priorities of Egypt. What can Egypt brings and put on the table of the G20? And it's always in the back of our mind that we have always seen ourselves as a natural partner and member of G20 since its inception. So we needed to be of value and to show our willingness to shoulder responsibility, but at the same time to pursue and advance our interests in this important group. And we brainstormed in our team at the Foreign Service. We reached out to other institutions and think tanks, including ECES. And the fact that all of us subscribe to is that when we embarked on the economic reforms, particularly starting 2016, it was in many ways contributing to more partnerships, collaborations, bridges with international financial institutions, with multilateral development banks, with the development partners at large. So we became more impacted by what was happening in the international financial architecture like never before. And this is why it was a priority for us to bring to the G20 our concerns and interests on three key issues that all of them have to do with international financial architecture. First, development finance. Second, the debt agenda. And third, the SDGs. On development finance, let me start our starting point to be the fact that when the World Bank was established, IMF, the GATT, the WTO, but in particular the international financial institutions, they were designed, managed, and equipped in a way that on average, they can handle and address one global crisis each decade. And if you look in particularly starting the 70s, you will see that we usually had an economic global crisis emanating from various corners of the world, on average once every decade. But we had to face the reality that these institutions are not ready to address 3 or 4 global crises in a matter of 3-4 years. And this has caused an unprecedented deficiency in the work of MDBs and IFIs, not only in terms of scarcity of development finance, but as well, which is as important, if not more important, on the ability of these institutions to mobilize private capital. Because at the end of the day, when we look, for example, at the infrastructure financing gap, which is between 15 and 20 trillion dollars, we need to pump in around 2 to 3 trillion dollars every year to be able to address this gap and to accommodate our development needs. And if you put all the IFIs together, they don't have even a considerable portion of this amount of financing. So I would believe that none of us in this room is under any illusion, and this has been deliberated many times, that we cannot bridge this gap without the private capital. But what we are trying to make MDBs realize more and more is that they have a critical role in mobilizing private capital to our countries through the various de-risking equipment and instruments that they have. And we have to admit that the performance of the IFIs and MDBs, including in the World Bank, when I was sitting at the board, was far from being adequate. In terms of debt, the debt agenda, I'm sure it's not a surprise that this was a priority for the Egyptian Sherpa, for the Egyptian delegation, for the Egyptian presidency, because the global debt landscape is so fragmented. In the last 20 to 30 years, the composition of creditors became much more diverse. Coordination between them became extremely daunting for so many reasons. The role of non-Paris Club creditors became so eminent. The private creditors became much more influential in the decision making. And to bring all of them in the room to solve debt problems proved to be so far from our least expectations. And the third is the SDGs. I will not dwell a lot about the SDGs, but we needed to bring at the G20 the conversation on SDGs back on track. And of course, we were not the only ones in the game. There were other countries coming with their own priorities. Some of them we really shared, like just transition, for example, food security. But on the other side, developed countries, they had different priorities, particularly on climate change and energy security, for reasons that I'm sure all of us are aware where it's coming from. And for the sake of time, I will not be able to maybe take you through a journey on how the discussions progressed in at the G20 on the various levels. Maybe this is in my advantage because I promise Abla as usual to be candid, but I'm not sure how I would be politically correct if I discussed how the negotiations were. But this is for a reason that we're all aware of, because once we sat on the table from the first Sherpa meeting, Abla, the elephant in the room was the war in Ukraine. And the geopolitical tensions were entrenched in each and every issue that we discussed, even though many of them had nothing to do with these tensions. In fact, we have seen some countries positioning themselves only according to the position of the other camp. So by the second Sherpa meeting, I think there was a great sense of disappointment and a great sense of Sherpas and ministers getting worried about the deliverables that we can achieve by the time leaders meet in Delhi in September. So we shifted our strategy to start discussing the Delhi Declaration from as early as June, because it seemed at that time that just coming out with a declaration in Delhi is something that was not even guaranteed. And I have to say, not because only Samir is with us, but this is a fact, that if it wasn't for the diplomatic weight and skills of India, definitely there wouldn't have been a declaration come out of Delhi, and Delhi would have been a failure. I think the brilliant thing that the Indian presidency did is that they kept the geopolitical part till the end, and we focus our negotiations on the substantive parts. But at the same time, I have to be candid and say that when you look at the declaration, and the declaration is accessible, you will see in each and every part that it represented the least common denominator. If someone asks me, has there been a breakthrough in the G20 summit? My honest answer would be, in these circumstances, we wouldn't have even thought that we would be able to achieve breakthroughs in each and every issue. But what India did is that they had kept these issues alive. When it comes to Egypt's priorities, the discussions on the table were quite diverse. People were very much in recognition that the international financial architecture needed reform, but this was defined in a different way according to each party. For example, when it comes to the evolution of multilateral development banks, the evolution meant something different to each camp. As I said, we wanted the MDBs to be better equipped, to be doing a better job in mobilizing private capital, but some others, they thought that evolving development banks means that they would de facto become climate banks. And our position and what our president said in the summit is that we shouldn't be in a position that countries should choose climate finance at the expense of other development needs. Maybe this is a sign that my time came. But I just wanted to give a couple of words, if I may, Omar, about starting Friday, Brazil will assume its presidency of the G20. And I'm happy to announce and to share that Brazil has invited Egypt to continue its participation at the G20. But I think there's a lot on the shoulder of the Brazilians. I mean, when I look at the agenda of today's event, it will discuss just transition, energy security, food security, and so on. But I think we need to realize that what's at stake is the multilateral system. And we have been seeing, particularly in the last few weeks and months, a repetition of selective multilateralism, biased multilateralism, double standards. And I think the Brazilians are realizing that if there is not a buy-in and a conviction by the membership of the G20, that each and every country has a stake in a reformed and credible multilateral system, the situation will be more dire. And this is for a simple fact. Again, if the post-Cold War remains in a state of collapse, an unmanageable state of collapse, and if human and nature remain on a collision course, producing more climate disasters and epidemics, we will continue to be in the mood of overlapping crises, one after the other. And if we don't have a resilient multilateral system, our countries would never be resilient, our economies would never be resilient, multilateral development banks would never be resilient. Again, I can continue talking about each and every aspect of what I mentioned in more details, but for the sake of time, I will stop here. And thank you again for giving me this opportunity. I appreciate it.
Thank you very much, Ragui, for an excellent keynote speech, focusing on the key issues. The multilateral system, by the way, is addressed in our last session very seriously. So it's on the agenda. You definitely touched upon the key issues of interest, the development finance, the debt agenda, the SDGs, the elephant in the room. We have two elephants in the room at this point. The fact that the declaration came out the best, it always takes the least position. I mean, you have to agree on something. But like you, and like what Mr. Omar said, I agree that India did a great job. I don't think anyone would have been, it would have been possible if it were another country. The fact that the next one is going to be in Brazil and then South Africa means that the global South has an opportunity to make a difference. It's on the map, let's carve it in the map, really, not just write it in ink. So hopefully we'll see a lot more coming. Thank you so much. Now, to you, Dr. Samir, go ahead.
Hi, let me just unmute myself and start. First of all, let me thank Dr. Abla Latif for this partnership opportunity. And we wish we could have been there in person. We wanted to be there in person, but I'm glad that the final Think 20 event is being hosted with ECES and on the auspicious occasion of 30 years of this organization. So let me wish everyone at ECES all the very best and many more years of guiding all of us through your writings, research, and interventions. Let me also congratulate the chairman of ECES, Omar Mohanna, for his leadership and for his partnership. And of course, let me acknowledge and greet Ambassador ElEtreby for his partnership during the G20 and his continuing commitment to regional economic affairs and multilateral and international relations. So thank you, Ambassador, for your contribution to the year that went by. In my remarks, let me first say that everything I wanted to say has already been said by the good ambassador. And I'm really going to be repeating myself if I go through the state of play, the global order, and what transpired. I thought instead, let me try and make 4 short points by way of opening remarks that could add to what the ambassador has already mentioned. So first of all, let me agree in toto, in complete with the previous speaker. I think his assessments are spot on, and as well as some of the opportunities and challenges that lie ahead. Having said that, let me make 4 short points. First, I think it would be fair to say that when India assumed charge, there was a disenchantment with the whole conception of globalization and multilateralism. So it was not just multilateralism that had been discredited or was paralyzed or was failing to deliver, but the conception of globalization, of global integration, of economic engagement had lost appeal. It had only served a few people. It was seen to be an elite conversation only favoring certain countries and certain communities. And people on the streets were becoming restive and were impatient. And it was difficult to convince them that building coalitions and working together could lead to better outcomes and a better future. So globalization was under threat. I think that's the first point I wanted to make. Second, the G20 as an institution had been in many ways relegated to very technocratic conversations and discussions that were narrowly focused on matters that were not relatable to people on the street. The G20, as is reductively referred to, had become the bankers' G20. It was all about maintaining the integrity and sanctity of the global financial system and the global banking order. It was no longer seen to be a body that could help the people respond to the larger crises that was engulfing the world at this particular point of time. The ambassador has named a few: SDGs, climate change, food security, hunger, and other development challenges. And that was the second point of departure when India took its presidency. Third, it was seen to be an elitist group that was limited to just 20 large economies and was not necessarily empathetic to concerns of a much wider committee of nations. It was seen to be self-serving and perhaps just an expansion of the ethic as well as the principles that founded the G7. And that is the third point at the time India took charge. And the fourth and final point was that it was happening at a time when this particular decade, the 2020s, from the American withdrawal from Afghanistan to the war in Ukraine to the clash on the Himalayas due to Chinese expansionism to of course, the report that paints a dismal picture on the SDGs, and of course now the Middle East crisis. This decade itself told us that international institutions were incapable of doing the job, and we required fresh thinking, fresh ideas, and a fresh constituency that would take claim and ownership to preserving an international order that was most required for them. And here I mean the global south, which this year has contributed 80% of global growth, would need to take charge and come forward systems and processes and perhaps build institutions that would serve global stability in the days ahead, because the Western-led order had failed and the West seemed no longer interested in investing in preserving the future. These were the four realities as India took charge. Now, I just want to complete my opening remarks by listing three takeaways that for me are important as we head to Brazil and as Brazil takes over this presentation. The first takeaway from the Indian presidency, it would be fair to say that the Indian presidency has changed the bankers G20 into a people's G20. We should not get overly focused on the success of the leaders' declaration. Its vast expanse, 80 plus documents and 120 plus action items. We should not only focus on the document. We should focus on the entire process. The process was a celebration of diversity, of nations coming together and trying to build consensus and find common pathways. I think the process was one of the key takeaways, and the participation of various countries, many who were invited, but also the Voice of the Global South Summit that the Indian Prime Minister hosted and heard the views of a large number of countries that helped shape the Indian agenda for its presidency was equally important. It became an enterprise of inclusion at a scale that was never seen before. So many countries coming together to contribute to the Indian presidency was celebration of globalization of a new variety, of a variety that emanates from the global south, and a variety that is sympathetic and empathetic to aspirations and viewpoints that may be different, that may disagree with you, and yet are important to include as we try to collectively respond to challenges that humankind faces. So I think that's the first takeaway, that consensus is possible, coalition building is possible, and countries come together is possible as long as we allow spaces that are safe, inclusive, and are empathetic. So I think that's one big takeaway, that globalization may be struggling, it is not dead. People want positive platforms of transformation, and if you build those, people will participate. And I think that's the first takeaway. From a think tank perspective, let me just give you a number. We published 323 policy briefs, authors from 75 countries, not the 20 of the G20, but 75 countries contributed to those policy briefs. 710 international institutions have their titles on the authorship of the papers. So you could see, even at the Think 20, we made an effort to make this a people's T20, a global G20, and we brought in people from all over. And in many ways, a new template of inclusion was created at the G20. So I think this is the first takeaway, that a people's G20, inclusion matters, and platforms that are safe and empathetic will encourage people to participate in all global efforts. The second, we have moved the G20 from focusing on first world issues, on the issues of financial stability of the Western variety and prudential norms for banks that have created value for the OECD countries, to the development issues that confront 7 billion people on planet Earth. This is perhaps, after Pittsburgh in 2009, this is perhaps the most important G20 where a big reset has taken place, a quiet, silent, but significant reset, where we have moved from being a bankers, a financially obsessed G20 to a development-focused G20. And I think this is important to note for presidencies that follow. And I'm sure with Brazil and South Africa next in line, we will be able to deeply embed the development questions into the architecture, into the DNA of G20. That's the second big takeaway from the Indian presidency. And the third and final, of course, has been the inclusion of the African Union, and a voice to a continent that has been denied to them many times in the past. Now, the reason I say this is that why this is an important takeaway is because for the first time, an organization that was based on GDP has treated at par a union of states in the African continent with the union of states in Europe. And the parity has finally been achieved. The presence of EU in the G20 and the exclusion of AU from the G20 was in many ways a colonial design, and that had to be removed. I think in many ways, this particular G20 has removed that biases from 70 years ago and made this into a contemporary 21st century organization, which has included voice of people that had been denied unfairly to them. And I think this is the three big takeaways for me. Climate change, SDGs, technology for all, gender-led growth, supply chain and resilience of minerals and materials are all issues that are tactical and important and operationally valid. But I think the big design change that this presidency has been able to effect are the three that I have just mentioned. I could go on, but for the want of time, let me end here and hand it back to Dr. Latif.
Thank you so much, Dr. Samir, for your excellent remarks, explaining the circumstances that India went through, actually, as it had received its president G20, and focusing on the three that consensus is possible, and it was an attempt that's seriously done by and the fact that you're changing the DNA of the G20. You definitely change the DNA of the T20. I'm not sure about the G20, about the DNA, if it's a permanent change or it's COVID change, you know what I mean? We're not quite sure. But what is for sure is that 3 years presidency in the South should make a difference. Adding the African Union, I like very much the fact that it's correcting the situation of an exclusion that was colonial and intentional. And I have to say that from the time of the Saudi G20, there was a lot of pressure on including Africa, and they refused at the time. They said, well, let's not get into trouble here. If we include Africa, who's going to agree on having anyone? Which country in Africa is going to be in? And what about Latin America? There are going to be issues. So let's not open this topic. This was seriously on the table during the time of Saudi Arabia. So, and it's really a big win, and I applaud the efforts of T20 and G20 in that direction. Thank you very much, Dr. Samir. Please, I hope you're going to stay with us through the rest of the day. Thank you so much. Now we are going to show a very short film, because we do have the second occasion. By the way, we have 3 occasions. I have to mention the third one. It's Omar Mohanna's birthday today as well. All right? It's by mere chance, yeah, see? So you're getting the applause. ECES did not get the applause, but you are getting the applause for the birthday. All right, let's show you this. So we made a very short movie expressing what happened through the 30 years. It's our way of very, very simply, very modestly as well, show the improvement that has taken place, even though modesty is still 22nd virtue, but still, I mean. So go ahead, Ibrahim, please.
We are very proud of this. Walid, please enter. Yeah, Walid, please. I want everyone working at ECS to please stand up because you deserve a very big applaud. Everybody. And yes, and a very special applaud because they suffered the last 2 days. In particular, this guy from IT and Walid Turki. Raise your hand, Walid. He's the one who did the movie. He's our genius artist. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. This concludes the opening session, and we're going to move right away to the first session.